Hi, Kimberly. How are you?
Hello, I'm great. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm so happy to have you here today.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So, I want to start by getting to know you a little bit and your background before we jump into all the incredible work that you are doing so passionately, all the things that you're invested in. Can you tell us a little bit about the roots of being impact driven or being an agent of change? When might that have first started to show up for you, you think?
I think it's first became. I mean, it's always been with me, and I can think of a lot of those core memories from being a little girl where we were talking about my dad, who was a boxer, was trying to tell us that we need to defend ourselves, and me saying like, they were like, I was advocating against violence, and it was like a little bit of a. It was a little bit of it was a joke and definitely some conversation because my response was, but you're not solving any problems. And so that I couldn't have been more than like maybe 10. And then by about 12, 13, I was beginning to do some public speaking, a lot of public speaking. And the piece that I chose to share with folks was about Harriet Tubman. I mean, this is like in the 80s, early 90s in Wisconsin. And I'd gotten so good at this particular piece that I was at States. And so I was in rural Wisconsin. I was a Muslim girl who was covering at the time. And I was reciting a poem about Harriet Tubman's dedication to risking her own freedom and life to bring other people north into freedom. And so I think in those moments, I was already beginning to clarify that was my positioning. Like that, there were parts of me that were not questionable, and that were not gonna, they weren't just gonna be like muddied by a room or who was in it. And so I think that kind of like that core sense of due north has been with me for a very long time, actually.
I really deeply relate to that.
Do you?
Yeah. I mean, everything you were just saying, I'm like, yeah, that's who I very much so was like that as a young girl too.
Yeah.
Like just this belief, this knowing, this drive, I guess, kind of, but just to be impact oriented and nothing really is going to get in your way.
No.
Of doing that.
And I think for me, impact is really anchored in a sense of justice. Right. So for me, it's not so much like the sake of, I was reading this morning something that said like ambition for the good only works when it defends the common good. Like there's nothing wrong with ambition. It's when it's not anchored in a deeper sense of justice that it can become really toxic. Yeah. And I think in like really embodying Harriet Tubman's energy as a little girl, I mean, I had to memorize that. I recited that poem over and over and over and over again. It was really about a carrying forward her vision for justice and freedom.
Love that. Mm-hmm. That's just awesome that from such a young age, even from such a young age, you were comfortable enough to be on stage.
That part is pretty interesting.
Public speaking.
I don't know where that came from.
Right?
Yeah.
And I actually feel the same. It has always been comfortable to me.
Yeah.
And it's a gift, I think.
I think it is a gift. I think language is a gift. And I think that, talking to Senator Casey's, former Senator Casey's, one of his like campaign advisors the other night, and we were talking about taking up space. So actually relative to playing basketball, which I don't do, but that he does. And I was like, even the willingness to take up space is really about the willingness to be seen. Like that's where it starts. We talk all the time about how do I take up space? And I'm like, first you have to step into a space where you're okay being visible. And I think that's something that some of us have as a gift. It's like an easy thing, and for other of us, we have to learn how to coach ourselves into comfort with being seen.
Yes, that's such a great point. Such a great point. So we have a lot to cover here when it comes to the amazing work that you're doing. Let's get into it. So let's first start talking about Grant Blvd.
Yeah.
Grant Blvd is a Philadelphia-based B-Corp that addresses climate change and criminal justice reform by producing stylish, sustainably sourced clothing and goods for the hospitality sector.
Mm-hmm. And for women.
And for women. Mm-hmm. Perfect. And you're wearing something that you created yourself as well.
Yeah.
Love that. Tell us more about this business and what inspired you to create it.
It's really like going back to that response, like a emerging sense of of just how dire our current situation is, both as a country and as a planet, and thinking about how I could pursue something that was intersectional and timely. And I didn't come from the world of fashion. I mean, I always liked style. I always liked vintage. I always liked the idea of time traveling with my closet. You know, a lot of people, we shop for mood, and I would often shop or dress for era. You know, like what was the story I wanted to tell, and that came through in like how I styled my hair. Was it going to be an afro, or would it be like, you know, the way I have it now with some body and some volume? And I think for me, when I thought about design writ large, it was, could I use fashion as a design solution? Could I use my sense of, my compass of style to create an opportunity that would be anchored in a community of women who are deeply marginalized, often because of the poverty that they've grown up with and the trauma of that poverty? And could we do that in a way that didn't deny the fact that the planet needs some innovative solutions for how we're going to think about material strategies and everything from like waste management to the very end of that life cycle? And so Grant Blvd was a solution that just sought to be multifaceted in its approach to recognizing where we are as a species, and then making that solution build out hyper local. You know, how could we figure out how we can manage procurement locally? How could we build studios locally and produce manufacturing sites locally, train people, retain them, create a culture of care, and design goods for people who, like you, are thinking about, through their own consciousness, the need to be more mindful about their own footprint and how they're creating their own personal impact. And so that's the story of Grant Blvd.
Love it. Love it. And Grant Blvd is the first Black-owned B-Corp in North America in the fashion space.
It is.
Which is awesome. Can you tell us about the experience of launching as the first Black-owned B-Corp and how that inspires your work and vision moving forward?
Yeah, you know, I think like a lot of businesses, I didn't know that becoming a B Corp was from the beginning was what was on even on the menu of possibilities, but what was built into the very foundation of that business approach was the things that B Corp continues to seek to defend, which is this balance of the needs of people and the needs of the planet in the pursuit of profit. And so when it came time to even think about what would be the ways in which I could better understand that business model, the ways in which I could grow my own community and signal that I had receipts for the work that I was doing, thinking about certification as a B Corp became a natural next step in that journey. So it wasn't like on the outset, that wasn't this is what I want to do. It was, I want to build something that aligns really closely with, again, my own sense of justice, my own sense of urgency, my own sense of awareness. And B Corp just happened to be a community that respected that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it seems like it was a good natural fit for those reasons.
Yeah, it was.
And you also have a thrift vintage brand called Black Ivy. So this kind of talks to your passion for vintage style. Can you tell us more about that and your mission behind that brand?
Yeah, I launched Black Ivy Thrift in February of 2022, so 22. So we're going on 2 years. And it always aspired from the beginning to pay homage to the people who, post Harriet Tubman, have always informed my sense of really intellectualism. James Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry, Angela Davis. These were thinkers and writers and creatives, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, who were up against such a toxic landscape culturally, and yet really always used style to tell a story. And when we think about the fashioning of a movement, that's always been a part of that civil rights era as well. You know, we think about Sunday's Best as another response to silencing. We can think about the ways in which the Black Panther Party chose to adopt the beret, which was a French revolutionary design aesthetic, as a way of signaling their solidarity with each other and their celebration of a redefining of Blackness, not as a force to be feared, but a force to be celebrated and to be accepted and to be protected. And that's what they really aspired to do, really for the good of the whole. So I really have always admired how these figures have used creative thinking and creative approaches to strengthen the fabric of American flavor, to really add something unique to everything that came out of what they produced, from music to the visual arts. And I also wanted to remind people, particularly in Philadelphia, a city so rooted in the early story of America, that progress in the protection of democracy cannot be separated from a remembrance of the tactics that folks used during the civil rights movement to advance every issue of justice.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the brand, where does that live? Is it online? Is it in stores? And
it's a brick and mortar experience. I mean,
what is it that you sell?
Yeah. So in that way, we think about as a curatorial project, what does it mean to create something that feels like a museum? So it's meant to be experienced in person. And so when you come into what is a reformed car garage, in the warmer months, the entire front of the retail space is accessible. It reminds me in that way of like old LA, or something you might find, in a wonky block in Brooklyn. Yeah. You walk in and you see, a gallery wall that's filled with images of a diverse coalition of Americans who were thinking about this movement in this time, who contributed between this period of 1954, which is when Brown v. Board of Education happens in the Supreme Court, through 1972, when Shirley Chisholm makes her bid to become the first Black woman president of the United States of America. And you get a sense of the vintage pieces from that moment, and those are garments that customers can take with them. They can also take with them rare vinyl from that era. So, we're talking about Sammy Davis Jr. and Harry Belafonte. And then you'll see in the space 2 books that are aligned with either the writers and thinkers of that era or contemporary writers and thinkers who are still echoing back to the messaging of what that cohort of creatives was producing in that moment. So and then there's that thrift piece, right? Like this idea that there are a lot of us who are thinking about our closets in sustainable fashion and sustainability, and maybe the vintage price point is higher than what they want, but they like that design aesthetic. They like those silhouettes, and so they can get that in a thrift experience. So that's Black Ivy. It's on 36th and Lancaster in West Philadelphia near Drexel's campus, right on Drexel's campus, essentially.
I need to come check this out.
Come check it out.
I love it. But there's also this storytelling element. It's like a historical storytelling and experience, it sounds like. Mm-hmm. And like, I'm thinking, as you're telling me all that, all the thought and effort that must go into sourcing the items that you're selling.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's like with everything that we create from the perspective of art, once you know the story you want to tell, a lot of the other things fade into the background. You walk into a space, whether it's in Arkansas or Virginia, or if it's a thrift store that's thousands of square feet in a suburb, you know what you're looking for. You know what is symbolic of that era, and the rest just kind of disappears. There's still like a sorting and a real intentionality about what we're choosing, what we're selecting to bring this story to life. But the clearer you get about what you want at the end, the easier it is to navigate it. And that way, it's like building any business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it is actually, so it does require you kind of traveling the country.
I travel generally, like I there are many times when I travel and when I'm feeling inspired, then I pack an extra suitcase and then I do some sourcing for Black Ivy Thrift.
That's so fun.
It is actually really, really, really fun. It is actually really fun and actually really hard because in a lot of ways, like in one, because I love these things. Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to remember that there are certain pieces that I do feel a particular calling to preserve, and there has to be many, many, many others that I'm creating opportunities for other people to participate in the preservation of the cultural, material culture of this moment.
Yeah, I could imagine that though. Like you're kind of forming a bond with these items, and you're like, I don't want to give them away.
And then you have the things that are your favorites, right? Yeah. Like I love James Baldwin. If I find those pieces, they're harder to give away, right? Yeah. And so it just becomes a matter of like generosity. Yeah.
And remembering the purpose of why you're doing it, right? Like
exactly.
This is meant to be shared.
Exactly. And my house, there are certainly things about it that look like a museum, but it's not intended to actually be a museum.
But that's probably really special to you.
It is.
To look on your walls and see,
it is
art or any sort of style in your home that speaks to this mission that's so important to you.
It is really, really remarkable. There are, I came across a massive collection of old Ebony magazines and old Life magazines from this era. And I took, some of them I gave to Black Ivy and put them out for public consumption. But there were a few that I kept for myself. One is the Life magazine that captures America, and it says in its anger and its sadness, which is the cover from April 4th, 1968, which has Coretta Scott King at Dr. King's funeral on the cover. Like, I have that issue in my home on display. And then Shirley Chisholm, who, she wrote a book that really has formed how I think about politics called Unbought and Unbossed. And there's an issue of Ebony with her on the cover that I have in my home. So I do think that there is this way that we have to all figure out, how do our spaces tell the stories of who we are and what we care about the most? And just like I use Black Ivy to tell that story, I certainly think about that in my life away from public gaze as well.
That's really inspiring to anyone who's listening and myself. I think not all of us think that way, about creating space in our home and moments in our home that do speak so well to what's important to us. Plenty of us have just pictures on the wall.
Yeah.
Obviously, your family means a lot to you, and putting, and we all have a bunch of art from Home Goods.
Yeah, that part. And that part. Yeah, that's very true.
I think also when you talk about like the sustainability piece, and, we could be more intentional about what we're choosing to put on our walls in a way that is more sustainable and isn't just grabbing all the stuff we can get that's trendy.
Yeah, and I do think that, like, all the things that we collect, and that's what we are as creatures, we are collectors.
Yeah.
There's another opportunity to use the things that we put on display in our homes as teaching tools for our families. When people come over for Thanksgiving, what is the story that you're engaging them in by what you've curated?
Yeah.
And what are you saying, right? And I think that sometimes we miss that our wall space is also a teaching space. And it's a reflection of what we love and how we feel, but it can also be a reflection of what we care about the most.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of teaching, that moves me perfectly into my next question. So, as a teaching faculty at Drexel University, you share with your students your insights into social and environmental justice. You are also the inaugural VP of Social Impact at the Fitler Club here in Philadelphia, and the founder of Build It Boldly, a digital community that empowers others to discover their purpose. Like I said, you got a lot going on.
I do.
You do, and I love it. So tell us more about each of these roles, and why is it important to you to dedicate your time and energy to educate, advocate, and create more positive change?
When I think about that symphony of involvements, I think if you look at them separately, you'd think that it's you might misread this nature of the canvas that is my life. The truth is that they all just are contributing different colors, but essentially they're ecosystem. In the rooms that I am in, my due north, it never shifts. What I care about is what I care about, and the commitment that I have to teaching about those things, it transcends. So in that way, it's not like I'm not picking up and putting down and being different people in the rooms that I go into. I take the skills and the values in every role that I serve, and I work with people who understand that I have not decided to silo my life into one 9 to 5, and I've done that. I was a classroom teacher for 20 years, and even in that role, I still was jumping between, okay, now I'm teaching 11th grade, now I'm teaching 9th grade, now I'm teaching about colonialism, now I'm teaching about, marginalization in the American story. That was in the scope of one day. And so I think when you come from a career where 18 of those years I taught freshmen, and there were 50 students in the room. My section's capped at 50 students. Wow. 50, 14, and 15-year-olds. And I had to be able to hear, what were they talking about? What was Drew talking about in the left corner? And, did Mike just drop more profanity? And is Bella cheating in the front row? When you have that, when you've developed that capacity to watch 50, 14, and 15-year-olds for that long, it actually means I trained for my life. So I think when people look at me, then they look at the things that are on the plate, on that canvas, it is full. But it's like being an Olympian. Olympians don't arrive to the Olympics and decide that day that they're going to run the fastest 800 time that's ever been recorded. They've been training for that, right? So we see the day on the day of the performance. We don't see what they've been, the prep work they've been putting in day after day, morning after morning, when no one was watching. And so in each of those roles, I'm always thinking about how are we creating safe spaces to speak courageously about what has to be discussed. Yesterday in my course at Drexel, they're hard things. In one of my sections, I teach a course on digital commerce. What does this landscape look like as we move away from the brick and mortar shopping experience? And I started with really helping to understand the foundational architecture of social media. So we watched The Social Dilemma. We did a screening of The Social Dilemma on Netflix, and then we deconstructed what are those takeaways about what's happening with people and the common good of people and the planet, and with the industry writ large, with consumption, right? And how do these platforms, how are they by design working for and against us? It's super unpleasant, because you realize how toxic that architecture is and how profit driven that is and what the implications of that are. And then I take that conversation and I'll take some of those tidbits and it dumps in my next class. We're talking about the true cost of fashion, and we're looking at the global supply chain and what that means for garment workers and what that means for water supplies. And then I take all of that and I might do programming at Fitler Club in April, which is about the nature of the climate, right? So in that way, it's not that they're not completely different. I have many learnings, and I'm learning how to distill those things to which is most appropriate for any given conversation. And that's just, it's an earned and a learned skill.
I could not love how you described that more. And it makes a lot of sense. And the ecosystem, describing it like that, it makes a lot of sense. And it's the canvas of your life. But it all works together and it all makes sense, to your point, towards your true north.
And I think that's a full life, right?
Yeah.
I think the more all of us are able to mine the totality of our experiences and then to own them and to lead with them, it actually creates much more freedom, because it's not the physical exhaustion of figuring out who am I going to be. I am one person, right? And I show up in these spaces with all of those living and professional experiences, and depending on the topic of a day, then I make it a new roux, for what that conversation demands. So it's not like the exhaustion of like, oh gosh, I have to take off this hat and put on that hat, or take off these shoes and put on these shoes. No, the outfit is the whole day. I'm wearing one outfit. 2 days. This is the outfit.
Yeah. Today. This is the outfit. It just makes a lot of sense. And I think it's super inspiring to hear you explain it that way. So thank you. Mm-hmm. And speaking of Build It Boldly, that is also the title of your new book.
It is.
So tell us more about the book and what inspired you to write that. That is a huge accomplishment in and of itself.
I received that. It's actually what it feels like. It's like anything new. There are certainly some new moments of vulnerability. Like the book seeks to be a really practical guide for people who are thinking about from a business perspective, from a leadership perspective, how are they going to leverage what they've been learning about themselves to think about ethical hiring and talent care and company culture and all those pieces that are practical to running a business. But the first 3 chapters are just about the things about myself that I've very rarely shared in public. And those are important because they set up how I develop this thinking about what was yet possible and the importance of a bold, intentional design in everything that we create, including our businesses. So in that way, it feels like certainly an achievement, It does feel that way. No one read my dissertation besides my dissertation committee.
Right.
So this is the first thing that I've written that people are really reading in that way. But there's a lot of excitement about it, which is actually, I think, is more of the achievement than actually producing the book. It's the enthusiasm about what I might have to say about my own ambition for the common good, which is to create 100 million social entrepreneurs. I'd love to see every business convert in that way. So if we get to 1 million, if in the course of the next 5 years, the real memorable note of my life and its legacy is that I inspired 1 million people to think about the reimagining of their own businesses or the business that they might build with a deeper lens for that triple bottom line, for that balance of concern, then that will be the thing that that'll be the thing where it's like, okay, I can die in that burst of dust that Maya Angelou speaks about.
I cannot wait to read that book.
It's a great read. It's very it's digestible. It's very plain. It's very tender. I really worked really hard to talk about things that I think a lot of people will resonate with because they are about trauma in ways that are respectful of the complexities of the human journey, including my parents, and how we can mine the places in our lives that are actually really, really painful, which is something that those of us who through therapy or really, really fantastic personal supports are able to do, to sit with it and then to leverage it to build something that is that seeks to honor the pain and the learnings. So
that's powerful. And it ties in very well to this topic that is probably my favorite topic to talk about. And I ask every single guest about it, but it's compassion.
Yeah.
And I think especially when you talk about trauma and working through the healing process, we think of compassion not only for others, but self-compassion through that journey. So can you tell us what your own definition of compassion is? And then, I guess, how does it relate to the work that you do?
I think the English teacher in me wants to break it down phonetically, like the etymology of that versus phonetically. And you think the calm is the with, and then we have passion, right? So I think when we think about compassion, we oftentimes think about the capacity to care for other people, to be mindful of their challenges, of their struggles, to see them in their whole nature and the multiplicity of parts. And I think compassion is really the ability to do that with energy. Right? It's like that idea that I will see you where you are. I will meet you where you are, and I will do that with joy and positive energy. Right? That is not a burden to me. Right? That is I've built in the things I need to build in behind the scenes to be able to arrive at that place with you. And I think that is for me what it means to really move through the world in right relationship with compassion. It's not a burden. I think oftentimes because there's so much burnout, the idea of being able to hold space for other people is we just don't have the ability to do it. But really compassion is I'm gonna journey with excitement out of deference and out of really deep regard for your wellness, recognizing that your wellness cannot be separated from my wellness, right? If I see you as sad, if I register you as sad, then in compassion, then that becomes my sadness. And for me, that is the beauty of like our own individual self-actualization, is that it gives us the capacity to be able to live with compassion.
Yes. The energy piece. I love the idea of the moving with energy with your compassion.
Yeah, and I think too, like, how do you do that, right? Where does that come from? And that is not of our own individual will, right? Compassion to me is being able to stand in a much deeper, broader force of light and good. And when you act on behalf of that force of light and good, then you don't have to have it, because if you're surrendered to being of service to that, it endows you. It endows you with the capacity to do it. So it is never about your or my individual capacity. It's submission to that larger work that then allows us to transcend what is truly it's beyond what we can do.
Yes.
Right? We can't do it.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I have taken on this sort of mantra every day of like, how can I be of service? How can that compassion move through me? How can that sort of medicine for the world move through me? And it's going to move through each of us in very unique, different ways, and that's a beautiful thing. But you're onto something there with the fact that it's not about each of us individually and what we can give in terms of compassion. It's how can we tap into that greater pool, that greater energy, that higher force that moves through us and then connects us all to that same love, really.
It reminds me of like Avatar, the idea that like you can link in and tap in, and that we cannot be separated.
Yes.
And we can build and try to fortify these firm walls that seek to keep us protected. And really, ultimately, when we choose that positioning, we deny ourselves the grace and the warmth and the tenderness of that larger force. We are rejecting it, instead of being vulnerable and porous and available. And I too think about that every day. Like, how can I surrender to your good use? It's like my thinking is like, put me in, coach. Like, like I want to play the game under your leadership. Put me in. And that has left, it's really been great for preserving my own sense of endurance.
Yes, absolutely. Because you're kind of handing it over.
Yeah.
Saying, put me in, coach.
Yeah. That's one of my
best way to look at it.
Exactly. And I think about that, and I think about this other mantra that I learned in a yoga retreat center in Massachusetts. It's, I am here now. And that's the idea that, and even in all those roles and, being a mom, I can only be in one room in one time at a time. And that means that when I'm with you, I am here now. And I think that is another way for us to protect ourselves from feeling like we are just absolutely overwhelmed by all the demands that the roles have of us and ask of us, is just to recognize that we can only be in one place.
Yes. Oh, I could talk about this for another hour. And so I hate to have to wrap this up, because this has just been such a great conversation.
So good.
And I can't thank you enough for bringing this energy into my day today, and hopefully into the day of everyone else as they listen to this, because this is good stuff. So lastly, let's make sure that all the listeners can find you, your work, and most importantly, your new book. So tell us all the places that we can connect with you, follow the business. How can we buy the book?
Yeah, all the things. So if you like the way I think about things and how I frame what is still yet possible, you can certainly follow me on Instagram, which is where I am mostly socially, at Kimberly McGlonn. You can also follow Build Boldly. So that's boldly. And my website's a great place to figure out and just keep up with where I am in the world. So that's drkimberlymcglonn.com. If you love the book, then you should definitely head to wherever you buy books from, if it's Amazon, if it's Barnes & Noble, and pick up a copy and leave a review on Goodreads or on any of those places. Good things, they do well when they're watered and they're given light by tender caregivers. And so I'm really excited to share this book with your audience, with all of you, and to share it with the world beyond. There's still so much optimism that must be defended, right? Pessimism is a tool of oppressive dark forces. And our antidote to that is to protect our optimism. And so I'm really excited to see how my language and my experiences continue to serve in defense of our collective sense of optimism.
Well, that was a powerful way to end this. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for being here.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.